Steelers defensive coordinator Teryl Austin is currently in the final year of his current contract, and the Steelers have a choice whether to bring him back and re-sign him this offseason or to let him walk and replace him with a new defensive coordinator. For me personally, if there's a good enough defensive coordinator candidate out there, and in my opinion there's more than good enough candidates out there, I would move on from Teryl Austin. And today we're going to be talking about some of the top defensive coordinator candidates for the Pittsburgh Steelers if they decide to let Teryl Austin walk. Now, we actually did a whole video on the Steelers' defensive turnaround in the second half. If you didn't know, they're actually top 5 in scoring defense here over the last month. And this defense has been playing its best football ever since they kind of did surgery on this defense midway through the season. So, I think Teryl Austin deserves some credit for that, but also I think it's fair to say that he is underperformed pretty consistently in his 4 years here in Pittsburgh. And for me personally, I would like to move on. But if you guys want to see the full breakdown of everything the Steelers defense has done during the Teryl Austin tenure, I'll put the chip to that video in the top right, as well as the link in the comments and description of today's show. And if you don't want to miss any of our videos here on Steelers Talk, they're all free, they're all informative, and hopefully they're all entertaining as well. If you guys like our content and our videos here on Steelers Talk, make sure you click that subscribe button to never miss any of our shows. Okay, so first up here, let's start with this. Let's start with Mike Tomlin connections because, I like to say it. It's not about what you know necessarily. It should be, but it's a lot of business and a lot of life, and the NFL is this way too. It's about who you know and what your connections are and all these different things. And there's certain certain coaches in this league that have pretty strong ties to Mike Tomlin, and the chances are if they replace Teryl Austin, it's going to be somebody that Tomlin is pretty familiar with. And I think that the person by far and away the most likely to be the next defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers if they move on from Teryl Austin is former Atlanta Falcons head coach Raheem Morris. All right, Raheem and Tomlin haven't coached together in a long time, since the Buccaneers days when they were both, coaching defense under Monty Kiffin and Tony Dungy and all those guys back in the day. But they go way back, man. Mike Tomlin has talked about Raheem and his friendship with him on a number of podcasts. Appearances, like the Pivot podcast, for example. It seems like every time Tomlin's on there, he's talking about Raheem and, their relationship, and, they're really big friends, okay? But, this isn't just a situation where, it's Tomlin's buddy getting the defensive coordinator position and he's completely, unqualified for the position. Like, this guy is a legitimate defensive coordinator. I think that he's one of these guys, man, that is just a good coordinator, like a Steve Spagnuolo or a Josh McDaniels or, somebody of that kind, where, he's had multiple chances to be a head coach. He's failed everywhere he's gone. But it seems like every time he has a chance to be a defensive coordinator, he does pretty darn well, man. And, players love playing for him. He's a high-energy individual. I think he'd be a great culture fit. And, when you are as charismatic where you can, be really good friends and keep up with the energy of Mike Tomlin, that says a lot about the type of person you are. And I think he'd get instant credibility inside the Steelers locker room, especially because one of his former players that he coached in LA, Jaylen Ramsey, he has a big connection to him as well. Jaylen, has been very, very clear about his feelings about Raheem Morris, and he believes he's one of, if not the best coach in the entire National Football League. He says he's the best coach that he's ever had. And he says he's had some great ones. That was a tweet back a couple years ago when Ra was getting, looks for head coaching opportunities. And, Ramsey made it abundantly clear. This guy's one of the best coaches in the National Football League. So the fact that the Steelers have an inline connection to this guy, I think, makes him, definitely one of the top DC candidates here in Pittsburgh if they move on from Teryl Austin. Ramsey didn't just say that. He also said the Falcons got one of, if not the best coach in the NFL when he eventually got the Falcon job. And he also said, it ain't just me who thinks this. Ask any player who has played for Raw. So this is a guy that, players love playing for, and he's been really successful as a defensive coordinator. He's run a bunch of different systems, everything from the Seattle 3 to the Fangio 6. Like, this guy has a wide array of different, defensive philosophies that he's deployed throughout the years. And, it's not like Atlanta's defense this year was like terrible. I mean, they developed 2 first-round picks at edge rusher this year. Xavier Watts looks like a really good player for them right now. So it's not like defense was like a huge issue for Atlanta this year, in my opinion. And I think if Pittsburgh does move on from Teryl Austin, by far and away the most likely candidate for this job is Raheem Morris. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. How would you grade a Raheem Morris DC hire here in Pittsburgh? Give me an A, B, C, D, or F. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments for today's pinned question. Just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And while I tell you about Prize Picks today, give me a grade for a potential Raheem Morris hire at DC here in Pittsburgh. With that said, we're from our sponsor today at Prize Picks, and it is officially the new year. It is here, 2026, and this is the best time of the year, guys, early on in the year for watching sports. Whether it's bowl games, playoff games, basketball and hockey season is now in full swing. It's all happening all at once, and it's all happening right now. And while all that action is going on, there's one place where it feels so good to be right, and that's Prize Picks. Prize Picks is super simple to play. Just pick more than or less than at least 2 player stat projections, and if you get your picks right, you could cash in. My favorite feature about Prize Picks, though, is how you play is up to you guys. If you want a little bit more flexibility, you can choose the flex play, where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you're feeling really strong about your lineup and want a bigger payout, you can go for the power play. No matter how you play, though, Prize Picks is a great way to put your takes to the test and make some money. That is, if you know ball. So for this week's Monday Night Football action between the Texans and the Steelers, I'm taking the less on the passing yards for C.J. Stroud, the more on receptions for Kenny Gainwell, and I'm taking the more on receiving yards for Pat Freiermuth. You guys can download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Speaking of former Atlanta coaches, let's talk about Jeff Ulbrich here, who was just the defensive coordinator under Raheem Morris in Atlanta. And Ulbrich is somebody that has a number of different connections to Pittsburgh. And, the first and foremost one here is that he is a pretty darn good defensive coordinator, so that speaks for itself on its own right. And it's also possible that Atlanta might keep Jeff Ulbrich as their defensive coordinator heading into next year. Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner, has already said he's going to recommend to their next head coach, whoever it ends up being, to keep Ulbrich on as DC, but ultimately Blank says he's going to let the new head coach make the decision. So Ulbrich could be back as DC. He's a very well-respected play caller in this league. I thought he did some really cool stuff in Atlanta with Raheem Morris this year, and some fun pressure packages, stuff like that. He also coordinated a couple of very successful defenses with the New York Jets over the years. But I think that he would come very highly recommended by Raheem Morris himself. Like, let's say Morris decides to go back to L.A. or something like that, and Chris Shula gets a job somewhere, the current Rams DC. Maybe he says, hey, I'm not coming to Pittsburgh, but this guy Ulbrich, man, he's got the real stuff, and he would be great as your DC. That could see that phone call being something that happens. And then also, Ulbrich has a connection to the Steelers offense as well, potentially, because Rodgers might be back next year, and he was the interim head coach after Robert Saleh was fired in New York last year. By all accounts, Rodgers, is on good terms with Ulbrich as a person, so he's got that connection as well. So certainly, I could see Ulbrich being an option if Raheem Morris ends up not coming to Pittsburgh. But then I'll go into Brian Flores here. I think this one is probably the least likely on the list here of 5 guys we're going to be talking about on today's show, just because it would be a lateral move. He's a defensive play caller and coordinator there in Minnesota. Would he really leave Minnesota to come call plays for Pittsburgh? I think it's possible. I also think Flores probably gets hired as a head coach this year. Like, there's a lot of teams being connected to Flores, including the Baltimore Ravens, which we really hope isn't the hire. I mean, I really don't want Flo coaching the Ravens because I respect the hell out of him as a coach. But also the Raiders are reportedly really in on him as well. So it just seems like this is the year that Flores is going to get a head coaching gig. So he's not going to come to Pittsburgh to be the DC if he's getting head coach opportunities. But if he's open to the possibility of leaving Minnesota and making a lateral move to come call plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers and his friend Mike Tomlin, I am so down for bringing back Brian Flores. All right, this guy is leading the charge of the defensive revolution in the National Football League with the split field palms and quarters looks that completely confuse quarterbacks. The cover zero looks that he does with that 7-man pressure package all lined up at the line of scrimmage. That's what he's famous for. They drop out of that. They got crazy disguises. Like, you think of a modern NFL defense, you think of Brian fucking Flores, man. And if he could somehow get his ass back to Pittsburgh as this team's DC and heir apparent to Mike Tomlin, essentially, that would be the home run hire here in Pittsburgh, plain and simply. But something that's more likely, maybe you can't get the master, but maybe you can get the apprentice, one of Flo's assistants with the Minnesota Vikings, all right? And there's two different guys here that I would consider, all right? Daronte Jones, who is currently his pass game coordinator there in Minnesota, and then also his safeties coach, DB coach Michael Hutchings, okay? These two guys, according to Flores himself, are responsible for coming up with the post-snap rotations and the pre-snap disguises in the secondary every single week. It's not Flores. It's his assistants that come up with those plans. And if you could get some of those disguises and those pre-snap disguises, those post-snap rotations that we're seeing in Minnesota right now here in Pittsburgh, that could make this Steelers defense really, really dangerous. This is what Flores had to say in his press conference, actually before the Dublin game in Week 4, talking about how these guys are responsible for that aspect of the Vikings defense. He says a lot of that credit for the disguises goes to Daronte Jones, our pass game coordinator, and Mike Hutchings, our safeties coach. They spend the lion's share of time with the group, and that's where a lot of the think tank kind of disguises show up. It's, hey, what are we doing on this one? And DJ and Hutch will kind of fill me in. So a lot of people think Flores is the one that's coming up with all these crazy disguises. It's actually some of his assistants, and if he ends up getting a head coaching job somewhere, I would love to get one of his assistants as the next defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now make sure you guys click that thumbs up icon if you haven't already. If you would like a Flores-style defense here in Pittsburgh, I know I would, man. I love that defense, okay? I would love, love, love that style of defense here in Pittsburgh. If you agree with me on that, click that thumbs up icon. And now let's get into some good defensive coordinator candidates that just aren't quite as linked to Pittsburgh as some of the other guys, the Flores people and the Raheem Morris people. But there's definitely some good names out there that the Steelers could consider and interview if Teryl Austin ends up not being brought back. I think Jim Schwartz is definitely somebody to consider because he runs that man-heavy style of defense that the Steelers tried to run this year. So maybe a better teacher would lead to better results with that style of defense. Schwartz has been one of the best press man, aggressive DCs in the league for a very long time. I think he would be super successful here in Pittsburgh. Anthony Weaver, who is the former DC of the Miami Dolphins defense, he preaches violence, man, and he commands a room. If you've never listened to one of his press conferences, man, I highly recommend it. That guy, when he says something, you listen, and he's got a presence to him. He's a former player. And then Sean McDermott, if he gets fired from Buffalo, and listen, man, if they lose to Jacksonville this weekend, anything's possible, especially with Jim Harbaugh out there in the coaching market. McDermott has been one of the pioneers of the pre-snap disguise in the National Football League. He's kind of led the charge on, quarters and, cover six and, disguising coverages pre-snap and rotating after the snap. So getting him in Pittsburgh would be a good hire, in my opinion. And then Arden Durde, who's the current DC in Seattle under Mike McDonald, doesn't call plays right now. McDonald does, so he might want a change of scenery to prove what he can do. Patrick Graham, former Raiders DC, I've admired him for a long time because of the multiple aspect of his defense, and he changes his scheme every year based on the players that he has on his defense. He learned that from Bill Belichick, and I would love that style of defensive coordinator here that's tailoring the defense every year to the talent that you have, as opposed to a coordinator trying to fit a peg into a hole, which most coordinators do. And then Jonathan Gannon, I think he's a underrated defensive coordinator. I don't think he's a head coach. I think he's never going to be a head coach in this league, but he has some very interesting pressure packages, and he bases out of the cover six and quarters world that is so successful nowadays. And then in terms of the guys that I would like, maybe, but maybe not are the highest candidates. Zachary Orr did some creative stuff with 3 safety stuff in Baltimore this year. That might be something that Mike Tomlin considers. Certainly familiar with his work in the division. Joe Witt Jr., a guy that worked for Dan Quinn for many years in Dallas and then in Washington. He just got fired. But he reminds me a lot of Mike Tomlin in the way he speaks and the way he talks about football. So it seems to me that those guys would hit it off. Mike Zimmer, an older coach, but maybe somebody that Tomlin has a little bit more of a connection with. Al Harris is somebody that worked with Dan Quinn as well. Nearly got the commander coordinator job a couple years ago. He's currently the pass game coordinator on defense under Dennis Allen in Chicago. Gus Bradley, helped bring in the Legion of Boom era with Pete Carroll and Dan Quinn in Seattle. That could be a name to consider. And then Gerard Mayo is another guy where he's not in the NFL right now. He's the former head coach of the New England Patriots, but he's a former Belichick guy. He's got the demeanor of a Mike Tomlin-esque type of coach, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he gets a look from the Pittsburgh Steelers. So who's your guy? Let me know down there in the comment section. If Teryl Austin leaves the Steelers, who do you think will be the new defensive coordinator of the black and gold? For me, if I had to guess, I think it would be Raheem Morris, one of Tomlin's best friends, all that different stuff. Great defensive coordinator, instant credibility inside the Steelers locker room. I think it would be a slam dunk hire, so that's who I'm going to go with today. But if you have a different idea, let me know what it is down there in the comment section. And that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers News and Rumors presented by Chat Sports. We got content like this on the Steelers every single day. And if we have a coaching search here in Pittsburgh, and that's not impossible with Teryl Austin's contract expiring, we're going to let you guys know everybody that they're interviewing. We're going to let you guys know what the rumors are, all the latest stories. So if you want daily and free updates on the Pittsburgh Steelers for the rest of this playoff run as well as offseason coverage, make sure you guys click that subscribe button for the #1 name in Steelers news.